watch this. And so, why is it that when you hear the pro-racist contingents, the woke contingents that will say, we want equal outcomes for everybody. When it comes to, but we want equal outcomes for women. We want equal outcomes for LGBTQ folks. We want equal outcomes for Black people. But except when it comes to abortion and fathers, they don't want equal outcomes when it comes to that. They don't want to close the gap between fatherhood and the white community and the Black community because they want to undermine it. Why? They want to continue to kill our babies. Why? Racism applies to every single thing except that. Right?
Nope.
So it says, here's the deal. It says when it comes to fathers in the family, they don't want to close the gap because the Marxist system hates the family because the family stands in the way of the state and the Marxist agenda, which is to control the values, the beliefs, and the theology of the populace. Because they want the populace totally dependent upon the state. The state hates God and it wants to be your God. Marx hated God and he said, I want to get rid of God. I want to get rid of the family because we want to be in control of the populace.
That's why they're trying to literally control our children from what they learn to what they eat to what they purposely inject into their bodies. That's a whole nother show. But I'm glad you mentioned that. So before we get into this father absence conversation, I think it's very important to define terms, right? So when you talk about father absence, I need you to specify exactly what you mean because every child born today, like everybody got parents. You have a mother and you have a father, but explain and define what you mean by father absence for the purpose of this discussion, because people just be like, everybody has a father, people just trying to be silly and just disingenuous. What do you mean by that?
Yep. So when I say father absence, what I mean is, number one, the father is the biological figure who has given his, half of my chromosomes, right? In conjunction with the woman who we had this child with, right? That's the person who's considered the father of the child. Well, in my book, I talk about the, three, kind of interactions that fathers can have on a spectrum with their children. You got the totally absent father. I call that the TAF father. He ain't around at all. My father actually bailed out when he found out my mother was pregnant. That's my personal story, right? So I had a totally absent father. He was nowhere around. Then you have the fit father, a father in proximity. He's around somewhere, right? He may drop off a Happy Meal every now and then. He may drop off a check here and there. He may occasionally show up at a parent-teacher conference or whatever. That father is in proximity, but he's not in the home. He's not there. He's not consistent. Then you have the pack father, what I call the Pac-Man dad. He's all over the board like Pac-Man, bing, 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 running the ghosts away, right? Taking care of the home front. That present, active, consistent dad who's in the home. Now, all pack fathers aren't necessarily in the home because some pack fathers, for whatever reason, they couldn't work it out with the mother of that child. They got a divorce. I understand that. And I'm not going to impugn those fathers to say they can't be a good dad because some of them are taking care of their responsibility both socially, financially, and spiritually because they're there. I spent 20 years in public education, 15 to 14 of those years as a school administrator. And so I saw fathers who weren't with the mother, but that dad was there. I could call him anytime I had any issues related to his child. He showed up. And so I want to make sure that I give shots out to those dad for whatever reason. They couldn't work it out with moms, but I praise their efforts. Okay.
Right.
So when I say father absence, I'm talking about the dad who is not present, active, consistent to the extent that child is getting the emotional, spiritual, social, and financial support that they need to flourish and grow.
So that's a TAF and a FIP.
TAF and a FIP. And
TAF and a FIP. Okay, glad that you clarified that because, like you said, for whatever reason, divorce sucks. Nobody wins in divorce, but there are just certain circumstances where I've got good, godly brothers that I know who she just didn't want to act right, and we know statistically. Y'all know I'm hard on women. I am because we a mess right now. But 80% of us are breaking up our homes and not for legitimate reasons, right? I've got some good godly brothers who are just like, I have tried everything. I've gone to counseling. I have done everything I could to keep my family together. And she want to run the streets. So I had to let her go. But they are present and active, and they have their kids more times than not. So
Right.
let's be clear. We're not talking about them, nor are we impugning, like you said, the ones who are products of divorce by no fault of their own. Like sin is just messy, right? Sin
Right.
just causes these things happen. And so, okay, so now that we've defined that. So my next question is, this conversation is interesting to me because, like I talked about in my intro, I am a product. I am like a third generation um, being raised without a father, a pack, right? Present, active, and consistent father in the home. My parents were married, divorced at 4. My mother never, she didn't meet her father till she was 18. And then her mother did not know her father as well. That's 3 generations, dating all the way back to the 20s. Like my grandmother was born in 1905, and then her daughter was born in like the 20. That was unheard of back then, right? And so I find it interesting when we try to have this conversation, Brother Brian, that, and I'm going to talk about this because I don't know how else to bring it up. Why is it that you or we get accused of blaming the victim? And the reason why I bring that up is because I can candidly have this conversation with my mother, and we have analyzed our family pathology, and not one time does my mother get offended. She doesn't get upset. She doesn't take it personal. Like she will actually agree that there are some significant deficiencies. And while I did the best that I could never be your father. And fathers matter. This is from a mom who raised 4 children on her own. Why is it today that this conversation is so difficult to have, and you or I get accused of blaming the victim?
Mhm. So that's a very good question, April. So that actually stems from how we've been conditioned in society. We've been
Mm,
conditioned, particularly the Black community. We've been conditioned to deflect
ah,
responsibility because we've been told we're victims. We've been told we've been told that it's white supremacy, it's slavery, it's Jim Crow, it's redlining, it's the lack of resources in our community. It's all of those things that have attributed to our father deficiency. And
mm,
so we've been conditioned to, again, you know what that does? That makes us dependent. Listen, here's what I actually quote. Let me quote myself from the
no.
book. I said, if you always are conditioned to look outside of yourself for the problem,
Mm,
you will never look inwardly for a solution.
come on.
You will never take look introspectively. You'll never develop a sense of self-efficacy to say whatever is within my locus of control. Now there are certain things that are outside of my locus of control.
Okay.
Things happen. I can be born into a situation that I had no control over by the hand of the sovereign God, who, according to Acts chapter 17, verse 26, says he places all of us in places according to his sovereign will, and he has placed us in the boundaries and the habitations for such a time that we would look up and feel after him
Come
and
on.
find him. And so we know that the sovereign God places us in particular places. However, there are things that we have control over. One of the things that I said in my book, April, is that I am no victim having been born Black to a single mother in America. I am no victim. And my mother, who's in heaven right now, I believe with all my heart because she was a born again believer filled with the Holy Spirit. She would tell you, son, you are right. I was no victim of anybody except for the decision of my parents to have me outside of the bound of matrimony.